Good. So, welcome, Richard. Or
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Is it Richard, or is it what?
Well,
How do you call yourself in your dreams?
a lot of my friends call me Rich. I always ask people to call me Dick because I think it's funny, but most people don't take me up on that.
Okay, Dick. reminds me of a conversation in this context that I've had with Tyson Yokoporta. And Tyson, at the end of the conversation, said something so dramatically funny. We were talking about the invisible hand of the market, and he said, in his super unique style, he said, "Yeah, but what if it's not a hand? What if it's a cock?"
He's brilliant. I really love that dude.
Yeah, so in that sense, that's exactly why we're here.
Yeah.
And to figure out how a governance system could look like in a world where we are in groups of 1,000 to 4,000 people. The lower bound is what we get from Forrest Landry, saying we need about 900 people to be able to have all of the skills that we need to really create a thriving community. And the upper bound, of course, is defined by the upper part of Dunbar scale, where the group cohesion breaks down. And so what we look at and what we imagine is we are in a group of 1,000 to 4,000 people, and we need to somehow create make decisions together, governance. And I'm totally clueless about how that works, but I hope to learn from you something about how that works. And why don't you just begin, because I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of things you want to say and have to say about this. Why don't you just begin offloading what's top of your mind, and then we slide into a conversation about this.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I should credentialize a little bit just to give give some context to where my perspective is coming from. So 10 years ago, I kind of accidentally stumbled into Occupy Wall Street and discovered this group of people that were doing governance innovation. They were doing lots of things, but one of the things they were doing was experimenting with different modes of decision-making and decentralized authority and collective intelligence and this sort of stuff. And there were kind of two main thrusts in that movement that I participated in. One is very decentralized, highly autonomous, something like 1,000 or more cities around the world activated some kind of Occupy camp or meetings or protests, and there was no central body coordinating that. There wasn't even really like a set of principles or an agreed set of demands, so like Extinction Rebellion, by contrast, which came out 7 or 8 years later, they at least had, these are the demands, these are the principles and values, anyone in the world can do anything they like, and call themselves Extinction Rebellion if they match this. And Occupy, there was none of that. There was no formal agreement about what we had in common. There was the informal agreement of the memes that we had in common, the shared typeface and the branding, and many of the topics of conversation were similar in different parts of the world. And there were these informal links, but it was just completely autonomous. No one even attempting to try and centralize. So it was really interesting. That was really quite awe-inspiring, to be honest. Like, it was my first introduction to activism, and I had the feeling of like, oh right, I've heard about this metaphor of like the planet having an immune system that might get activated at some point. That maybe it would feel like this, that you have all of these camps all around the world suddenly spontaneously coming up like mushrooms out of nowhere, and people practicing a different way of doing community, a different way of doing decision making. So there was that thrust, which was very decentralized. And then the other thrust was all about consensus. So like in our camp in Wellington, New Zealand, where I'm from, we had a general assembly. At first, it was every 2 days, twice a day. And then later on, it was once a day. But this is like a long meeting, a long consensus meeting where sometimes you'll have 50 or 100 people. Sometimes those people are intoxicated or like really mentally unwell, just like whoever showed up, trying to make decisions together, trying to decide, how do we run this community that's come up out of nowhere? How do we feed people? You know, it's like a village that's just cropped up in a city. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made. And that was fascinating too, in a really quite a different way. It was much more about pulling together unity, coherence. Let's listen to everyone. Yes, it's slow, but the benefit is everyone gets the experience of mattering, you know, like every voice counts here. And on a good day, you would hear all of this dissent and different points of view and collectively manage to assemble a collective intelligence where it's like, my experience of it was like, oh, okay, on any issue, whether it's like, how are we going to feed people into camp, to what do you think about capitalism? It's like there's always a full circle of perspectives required. And I can only ever have this much of, you know, that I can never get more than this. Maybe I can get this much, but it really requires a full perspective of people with all sorts of different experiences to develop a full picture. And that was the consensus process at its best. You know, like some of our best actions that we did in Occupy Wellington, one of them in particular was led by like a 7-year-old who brought a proposal for a particular protest they wanted to do. It was amazing. So that kind of proof of everyone matters, ideas can come from anywhere, we're really going to listen, like that was awesome. But it was also just really inefficient and crushingly painful, where they were like, it kind of becomes, I think in some of the activists in Spain have told me they have this expression, which is like the tyranny of the iron butt. And it's like, who can sit the longest is the one who wins, you know?
Okay.
So it was obvious to me that there were some real shortcomings in that consensus-driven model.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming from that, my friends and I that had been inspired at Occupy thought, you know, how do we innovate from here? How do we evolve from here? How do we grab what was so great and then get past what was not so good? So then we started Lumio, the software platform for decision making, joined Inspiral, which is like 200 people prototyping new ways of working together. Mm-hmm. And then that's been the last 10 years. It's just been experimenting with self-management, non-hierarchical organizing. A lot of it in the last 5 years has been much more of a kind of consulting and training role, going into other organizations and supporting them as they find their feet into a like more cooperative way of working. So my focal point has mostly been on a really small scale. So even smaller than that you're talking about. Like a lot of the groups that I'm in, they'll be like under 300 people or under 500. Okay. And even then, a lot of my work personally is on the scale of about 5 people. Mm-hmm. And I'm just following my sort of inner compass that tells me where I've got something to contribute. And what it's telling me is, yes, someone can go off and design a fabulous system for how we're going to govern these new nations that might emerge over the coming decades, you know, with millions of people in them. Maybe someone will get some brilliant ideas, but all of us, that's a very rarefied role who could take that job on, but all of us can practice a local kind of democracy with 5 people or with 50 people and experience both the power and the trade-off of working with others in this like non-domineering way of relating. And all of us can learn a lot from that. And maybe if more people had more experience with this non-hierarchical way of relating, the designs that we would come up with for how we want our next society to be would be informed by lived experience, not just by this imaginary space.
Okay. So I have a question around this. Do you somehow in there, in what you're saying, I could interpret this as that there is a fractal notion to this. So if it works with 5 or 50 people, it might also work with 500 or 5,000. Of course, something in the processes will change, but the underlying understanding and notion between the people that are involved will stay the same. That's about right.
Yes, sort of. So like I love fractals. I'm a buzzy hippie who likes to have these like diagrams that make things look really
Mm-hmm.
beautiful and inspiring. But I am suspicious of any kind of political futurism that assumes we can just do small change and it will magically add up to something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
That you just kind of wish away the hard problems by saying, well, it's a fractal. You just do it small and then it dot dot dot
Mm-hmm.
adds up to something big. I think the systems that we're currently operating in, like capitalism, for example, are really good at actually consuming those small changes.
Mm-hmm.
And preventing them from adding up. And so we actually have to do the adding up intentionally. And it's somebody's job to add up the small change. So I don't just want to wish that it adds up somehow. Like there's a real design job there.
I agree. I agree on that. So it's not, it doesn't grow by itself, but functionally, if you know how to do this with 50 people, it's you're let's say 70% the way to doing it with 500 people.
Yeah,
that's still work, right? Of course.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. So I really, Robin Dunbar recently did an interview with Jim Rutt, which I think is really worth listening to, where he unpacked,
I know.
the specific numbers of 5, 15, 50, 150, 500. Like, I think it's really useful to draw a group boundary at each one of those scales.
Mm-hmm.
You can afford to skip one or two of them, but most of the groups that I'm working in, they're just trying to skip all of them. They're trying to go like, we're going to have a million people in this movement, and they're all going to be isolated individuals, and somehow they're going to come together as a million and be a coherent whole. It's like, no, it doesn't work. You need to have a movement composed of groups of 5, and those 5 have to be organized into groups of 15, and those into 50. And like I say, skip 1 or 2 levels, fine, but there actually needs to be a lot of nested boundaries. And what you find when you work at those different scales is each scale of human group has got different affordances, different competences, different strengths, different appropriate. Like if you imagine an army that has like a platoon and a company and a squadron and these different kind of sizes, depending on the strategy, depending on the tactics that the army's got to deal with from any given moment, you might move an entire company, or you might be just moving a small platoon, or it's sort of, you've got this ability to move as a whole or to move as many small parts. And I think we need more people to be competent at some of these different scales and to understand when you've got 5 people, we can actually have shared consciousness. We can actually all simultaneously imagine every other person's perspective after a good conversation. With 15 or with 50, that's just impossible. So we have to have some kind of, if we want to have shared context, we have to have some kind of prosthetics, whether that's documents or a whiteboard, or like we put them into breakout groups, or there's got to be some, we've just got to adapt to the terrain that we find ourselves in. And I just don't know that many people who are really adroit, that are really fluid workers in groups of 5, 15, 50, and 150. That's actually really hard to find people that are good at that. And I'm looking for those ones to talk about what are we going to do at the scale of 5,000, for example.
Okay, but let's begin small. What would you say needs to be done on a scale of 5 and 15 to get people into really coherent action?
Yeah, and of course it depends on what your values are and what your aims are. But let's assume that you and I and whoever's listening have some kind of similar values. They might be hard to put our finger on, but we've got something in common. For me, I mean, I do, that sometimes you'll hear in the game B space about like non-rivalrous interactions and personal sovereignty, those sorts of things. Not exactly my language, but works for me. So we're trying to cultivate people who are highly agentic. They really feel like in charge of their lives. They've got freedom. They've got room to move. And they're also anti-rivalrous. So they're working together in a way that's mutually beneficial. They're not competing. They're not dominating each other.
So I think I understand why you do this, but could you elaborate a little bit as to why this is important?
Well, it's just, I think that's a values choice. You could also choose to, you might have a fascist set of values where you're like, what we're looking for is the Uberman that we're all going to follow, and we're going to get up into a nice hierarchy, and we're going to follow the leader and do as we're told. Like that's a values choice, and good luck to people that want to do that. It's just not my this is not my jam. For me, the world that I want to create is full of all of these free people who are in relationships of mutual support, that are really like have this kind of abundant giving and taking of care. That's kind of the world that I want to build with people. And I set all that up because I think both of those things, both the sovereignty and the non-rivalry, or the coming out of domination, both of those things, we've been conditioned in certain ways as we've grown up in our families and schooling and church and all the rest, that have shaped us to be a certain way. And it's different from this culture that we imagine we might want to live in. And so one of the things to do in the small group is to do some reconditioning, to set your sights on, how do we want to be? Like, what are the qualities that we want to manifest? What kind of characters do we want to become? And to do some interior curiosity and go, well, okay, I want to learn how to not be a dominator. Well, when do I dominate? When does that come up in me? Like, what instincts do I have? What reflexes do I have to dominate another person? Or what reflexes do I have to submit? Like, how do I respond when there's a high status person in the room? And can each of us, can we set a goal for ourselves about how we want to change or develop, and then be there for each other in our developmental journey?
But that's on an individual basis, right? So the individual, based on the shared value set, the individual does the work on him or herself to better understand, to deepen their own understanding. Is that the first step? Sort
of. In my frame of reference, you can't develop on your own. Like, you have to do it yourself, but you can't do it alone.
Okay.
That there's always someone else holding a nurturing container. There's always an incubator. There's always a mother. There's always a space that's being held by someone.
Sometimes
it doesn't have to be a mother, because you can reciprocate for each other. You can take turns.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes you can even simulate that like, for instance, I know people that are kind of reparenting themselves by imagining, in certain scenarios, they imagine, what would a more mature version of myself do in this moment, and sort of summon this imaginary parent to coach them in this moment, to like, but still it's like there's a relationship there, even though it's all happening inside of one person.
It works better if you do that in the bathtub. Seriously.
Yeah, so this gets into a whole like embodiment track, which is not my specialty, but I know it's important. the physical relaxation that needs to come along with it, right?
Yeah, and the feeling of lightness and warmth, and you feel like you're in the womb again, in a way, right? So.
Yeah. So there's like, at least in the kinds of groups that I'm into, people kind of have to be up for what I call interior curiosity. They have to be curious about, like, oh, why did I react that way? Why am I moved to anger right now? Or why do I feel shame? Rather than always pointing outwards at, like, that person said the wrong thing and they're in trouble. That's kind of like a requirement for entry.
That's super interesting. I have a conversation with Jim about something similar, about where what is the minimal condition for somebody in somebody's system to move into this internal curiosity, how you call it, so to tie to the loop between system 1 and system 2, right? So what is in your understanding, what are the precursors, the preconditions that you need for somebody to be able to go into that mode?
The interior curiosity is like, you either have it or you don't. You're either in a space where you can activate it or you're not. And so it's a very clear test. And in our work with groups, it's really obvious. Like, in any group encounter, there's always someone who has some kind of struggle or difficulty, or they bring a dissent, or there's conflict or something. And kind of like 1 in 100 people that we encounter, it's just clear that they're not able or willing to do the interior curiosity. And basically, we'll give them our compassionate attention for a bit, and pretty quickly we'll just say, there's nothing we can do to help you. And that's not a statement about them, that's a statement about us and the relationship and the context. I think the thing that makes the most difference is basically role modeling. You know, it's like a role model is someone who I see that I identify with, where it's like, maybe you're a bit older than me and I recognize, hey, you've got maybe some of the same backstory as I do. You're an engineer, I'm an engineer, or like we come from the same part of the world, or I have some shared values alignment with you that I recognize. And then I've seen something in your life story, you've gotten to a point that I want to get to, but I haven't got to yet. There's this, like, I'm imagining my way into your life story. And I feel this like enigmatic quality of like, there's something about you, I want it, I don't know what it is, I want to get close to you. There's a kind of drive that people have. And then you just do the mammal thing, the mimicry thing, the like, you copy what they're doing. And so like, you know, I think it's quite well documented about how in a group, vulnerability happens in loops, right? So if someone who has a secure, like a decent status position in the group models, I'm going to be vulnerable, hey, I'm really not feeling well today, I can't do this thing, blah, blah, blah. And if you see them being accepted and not punished, then you're more likely to then venture your own vulnerability, and it reinforces each other. You're like, oh, okay, this is a space where it's okay to be vulnerable, and like I say, do this interior curiosity. Whereas if you see someone share some vulnerability and get shut down, you're like, okay, I know this is not the space for me.
Do you use vulnerability just as a random example, or is there a purpose in vulnerability?
Probably a bit of both. Like, the reason that people don't want to do the interior curiosity is because they don't want to do the vulnerability. They don't want to admit. So like if it's a conflicting situation, for example, it's like, I'm going to put all of my energy outwards looking at that wrongdoer out there because I don't want to admit to any shortcomings or weaknesses of my own. Because of, you know, some background fear of punishment, or I'll be disowned, or what does it say about me if I also participated in this dynamic, or so there's definitely a crucial component of it.
Yeah, I agree. It's once a couple of years ago, I spent a year thinking about what would be the difference between us and machines, assuming that machines can potentially do anything we can do, right? And you know, for the majority of that year, I was looking for something that we are stronger in. There's just nothing there, and not even emotions, feelings, love. If they need this for their evolution as a machine, they will develop it. We might not understand it, but they will have it. But the only thing that I can come up with that distinguishes us from machines is our vulnerability. For a machine, it's always comparatively easy to exchange a part. I have a little wound here on my arm. It hasn't been healing for the last 3 months, right? So that takes time. If you have a wound in your soul or your mind, it takes time. A machine can just roll back to your previous software state or data state, right? So vulnerability is, from that perspective, the core of humanness to me. And I sometimes use that story to in meetings to ground people into that. So yeah, that's why I was curious about why you use vulnerability.
Well, yeah, I think there's a bigger context for me, which is about needs in general. Like that everyone comes into Earth very, very needy. And if you're not surrounded by people, you know, abundantly offering their nurturance and their surplus, you're dead. You're hopeless. You've got no chance. And we never grow out of that. We like to sometimes believe that we're these like independent grown-ups, but we're not. We never are. We're always entangled in this web of needs. And that again can be really beautiful. It can be a real opportunity. Like I've been thinking lately about, you know, the promise of trade being that you have all of these different people that have different specialties and they exchange, and that creates prosperity because everyone just does what they're best at. And in the exchange, everyone's better off. I think the exact same thing about our core emotional needs. Like some of us are really charged up with the core need for meaning and purpose. And we can use that and distribute it to others and inspire them and give them, uplift them in that way. Other people are really charged up with that core need of status and recognition, and they can use that to elevate other people. And we can actually design our encounters where we expose our needs and go, oh, I'm high on this balance and I'm low on this balance. Is there anyone else that can make an exchange with me? And with the right process, everyone comes out better off than they went in. So you get into this like upward spiral.
So you could encode these different charges in different forms of capital, like Ethan Solovyev's 8 forms, for example, social, cultural, experiential, etc. Is that something you actively use in a group of people to make these flows of different charges or forms of capital noticeable between them?
We haven't explicitly done it, but I really want to try now, because we were just together at the Emerge gathering, and Indra Adnan put up this graphic of the 9 core human emotional needs from the Human Givens framework. And it just made me realize, like, it gave me such a good lens into what was happening in that group, where some people were having a great time and other people were irritated or frustrated or annoyed or whatever. And it was basically the people that showed up with a lot of needs were having a hard time because they didn't know how to get their needs met. Whereas the people that weren't so needful, they were just roaming the room, having the time of their lives. So it gave me the idea that I'd like to try at another event, is basically give people that grid. Here are the 9 basic human needs. As you arrive, just privately for yourself, rank like 1 to 10. Where are you on the balances on all of these? And choose one that you're going to offer to others and one that you're going to seek from others. And this is your private quest for the next 3 days of the gathering. You're going to go and try and get this balance topped up, and you're going to top up someone else's balance, and just see what happens if we actually did that. Because that was one thing that was really missing for me from the gathering, was I didn't see a lot of that human vulnerability coming from the stage. People saying like, hey, I'm this brilliant thinker. I've pulled together all these people because we're going to change the world. We've got this amazing new vision for how everything's going to be different. But I didn't hear the personal component of like, and I need this thing to do this, like this is my personal, precious, tender spot. And please be careful and gentle with me. And please help me in this, and I'll help you. Like that was the piece that I was really missing. And so it gave me the sense of like, I would like to try that with a gathering.
Interesting. I'm scheduled for a call with Indra sometime soon, but I think I missed those. Could you send me a link or something, because I might just prototype it tonight with the gathering I'm at.
Yes, I wrote a tweet the other day, so I'll grab it for you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. I have a tweet for everything.
So we're still at the 5 people range, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important for me to say that, like, there's this really naive interpretation that I fall into as well, that you've got to start at the small scale and work your way up to the top. And I don't think that's accurate. I think all of the scales are interacting with each other all of the time, and you can choose where to put your focus. But for example, like if you were born in Sweden or you were born in North Korea, the large scale context is going to have a huge impact on what that little group of 5 people is like. And maybe if you're in North Korea, the best thing you can do is go and like try and overthrow the government and just focus on the large scale. And there's not actually that much work for you to do at the small scale. It's really contextual. But my picture is like, yeah, you can't really do much development on your own. Mostly it happens in relationship. The group of 5 is a really potent place to do it, because you can maintain shared context and you don't need rules. You don't need prosthetics of any kind to govern the group. It just, once you have chemistry, it just goes really well. It's also, when it comes to doing work together, it's a hyper efficient unit for getting shit done. And then what you'll find is, as you start getting more high stakes collaboration, where it's not just about having some emotional connection and personal development, but it's doing work, it's like sharing contracts, it's developing a project, you're going to have conflicts. You're going to have some kind of drama and you're going to need to deal with it. So then what? Well, then it's good if you've got someone else to turn to that can come and help you mediate, that there's someone who's not immediately in your circle but is adjacent to you, that can help you see sense or get a different perspective or like mediate in a debate. And so then you want that group of 5 to be alongside other groups of 5. And like I said, you want to find a sense of chemistry with people. That means there's some kind of dating process, you know, where people are kind of like reconfiguring into different groups and finding like, where's my crew? Where's my little pod? So there needs to be a bigger context for those groups of 5 to form.
Okay. And so does that scale? So is that something, is that a principle that you have seen, or that you have a sense that it might apply to bigger groups? So if you are 10 groups of 5 and then 3 groups of 50.
Yeah. So where we're at the moment, it's like, it was very obvious to me. And Spiral has always fluctuated between 100 and 200 people over the years, over the last 10 years. And it's primarily governed through trust and relationships. And that's why it's limited to 200, right? It's like, you just can't keep that much coherence. You need all of this infrastructure that no one's willing to build. No one's willing to do the governance work for a larger group. And what I noticed was in that, the people who are having the best time in the community were the ones that were securely anchored in a group of 5 or 4 or 8, but you know, around that size. And so then we got really explicit together, like, if you want to have a good time at Inspiral, your job is to find your crew. You need to go dating until you find your crew, and then you're going to be sorted. So that's been really strong and stable. And then I started the Micro Solidarity Project as a way of trying to answer the question, how do we start more in spirals? So how do we have more at this scale, 150, 200 people, where you're doing, number 1, meeting people's need for belonging, and then number 2, meeting the need for meaningful work. Like, how many of these communities can we initiate? And my partner Nati and I have been running trainings for the last 18 months. I think we've trained about 300 people now. And the training is basically, once you graduate from the training, it's very simple, very lightweight. But the first, your kind of like informal credential is like, you're now ready to host a crew. It's like, here's a bunch of practices, a bunch of skills just to host 3, 4, 5 people. So you know what you're doing and you feel you've got some confidence. And then maybe 5 or 10% of the participants that have come through that course, they're also working at what I call the congregation scale, the community scale, the 150 scale. And so now I'm like personally, I guess, coaching or learning alongside about 15 or 20 of these different community hosts. And it's getting to the point now where I'm too much of a bottleneck and I need to have a little crew around me that's helping play this peer support role. But there's a real natural kind of acceleration to it, where it feels over the next 18 months, we'll probably have at least 50 of these groups meaningfully supporting each other. And they've all got different identities. They've all got slightly different purposes. You know, like one of them is a physical community grounded on a small island in the Atlantic. Other ones are like, you know, all completely remote. There's like lots of different flavors, but sharing the same patterns. And so I can see the scale of like 5,000 people quite close on the horizon. And then the question will be, okay, is there a next threshold where we go to 50,000? And that's a little bit too far into the future for me to really imagine, but it seems kind of likely that if the patterns are, if they fit in different contexts well, then probably it's just going to keep going on that exponential curve.
So in a way, this could be imagined like a bit like pheromone trails coming out of the groups of 5 and then finding their ways through slightly bigger groups, through individuals who are able to join both or to act on both scales, on the small scale and on the next larger scale, right? And then there are some very select individuals who could translate from 5 to 5 million or whatever, and be able to be active on all of these scales, maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, in my travels in the last 10 years, I have met a few characters where I would say, I would trust you to be my delegate at the scale of 5 million, you know, so like, to get really concrete, probably number 1 on that list would be Audrey Tang from Taiwan, who's the digital minister. There's someone who I just trust their integrity top to bottom on that scale. And there might be a few others that have been kind of central figures in large social movements where it's like, this person really is, they're the real deal. They've got the full integrity. I trust them, but they're very rare to come across.
That would have been my question now, right? Because how does the power delegation or the authorization work? And you just mentioned trust. I know a few people as well that I would trust in such a way, but it is very hard for me to say why. So what do you have some framework or some language around why do you trust Audrey Tang, for example?
So maybe it's useful as well to sketch in some more detail about Inspiral, where in our structure, and this is, by the way, this is going out of date right now and we're evolving, but in the last 10 years, there's been a very clear boundary where we have what's called the members. So you've got members and contributors. And the members is this like tight core of highly trusted people. And it's been 30 to 50 people, right? So it's a particular scale again. And there's a depth of trust that you can cultivate with 30 people that you can't with 100. And we've had this process of like, contributors are invited to become members very occasionally, where it's like, we'll see someone like, we think you've got what it takes to be what we want to share the ownership and the responsibility of governing this network with you. And it's a very interesting question, what qualifies someone to cross that threshold? And it's completely about, do I trust them? For me, usually I would only say yes to a new member if I'd seen them in conflict. I'd seen them fuck up. I'd seen how they have dropped on their commitments. They have like gone through some kind of like honeymoon and then hangover period. Like I've seen what they look like when they're down and out. And then I've seen how they reconstruct accountability afterwards. And once I've seen that, then I'm like, okay, this is someone that I'm willing to delegate my vote to if necessary. That's a big component of it. There's probably lots of other little pieces as well. I mean, like it's really important for me, I think, when we're talking about trust, especially in this age where you've got this like new surge of crypto and Web3 and all this, people thinking about how do we do trustless systems or how do we do trust on the blockchain or blah, blah, blah. It's so important to me to emphasize trust happens in your tummy, like in your guts. And when you see someone disagreeing with a proposal, it's not because they've got a problem with the text of the proposal. It's because there's a feeling in their tummy that says, I'm not welcome here. People are not listening to me. There's a threat. It's not a rational process first and foremost. It's like an embodied process. And so much of the trust comes from our embodied encounters. So that's one of the criteria for me, is like, I have to have spent time with you face to face. I have to smell your pheromones, share a meal together. Like eating is obviously one of these like basic human acts that fosters trust. So that's some of it. And then when you ask like Audrey Tang, for example, I guess it's this thing of we've shared a few meals together. We've been in the same space together. We've explored each other's minds. I haven't seen her fuck up. She's too much of a genius. I'm sure she will at some point. I guess I've seen her demonstrate vulnerability. So one of the first things we talked about was like her experience in therapy. So it's like, okay, this person is willing to be honest about their shortcomings. And then as they get more and more powerful, they appear at least to be acting with integrity. And that's the other thing, is that usually people gain power and their character suffers in the process.
I agree. That's super rare. Do you see, as you were describing this, I was somehow reminded of initiation rites. So an initiation rite, in the sense that you get pushed to your absolute boundary, and through that experience, you're somehow transformed into a new level of complexity that with which you address the world, and you are able to integrate much more. And if that is part of the cultural fabric, and everybody goes through such an experience, everybody everybody else knows, okay, this person has had this experience. I can trust that his or her mindset complexity or soul set complexity is at a certain level that I can relate to. So I have a higher entry point for the trust.
Yeah. So maybe it's worth reframing. Like I described, I think these people are rare, these ones that you can trust with a really high scale of like delegated authority. But maybe the people are not rare. It's actually my capacity for giving trust that's rare. Mm-hmm. So, and because of the lack of initiations. So at this Emerge gathering, one thing that I noticed on the second day, at the start of the second day, there was this collective groan, like a literal groan that people did, which to me, the meaning I put on it was like basically vocalizing people's frustrations with the shortcomings of the process design, with their annoyance with the facilitation, like, I wish it was this way and it wasn't that way, and like, with all due respect to the people having the experience that they were having, what was going through my mind was, you're a fucking baby. You're a fucking baby. Like, this is the best possible place I could hope to be in the world. Mm-hmm. And sure, sometimes the facilitator suggests something that I'm not that excited about. And if I don't like it, I'll just go next door and have a great conversation with someone else. It looked to me like people expressing their mummy issues and their daddy issues, like, and really, and I'm like, if we can't even, as a group of so-called like highly integrated conscious people, delegate some authority to a facilitator for a couple of hours and say, yeah, what you've got for us is good enough. We're going to go with you. Like, how do we hope to organize a widespread movement? Like, if you can't give over some power temporarily to someone to take on that leadership role and just empower them and respect them and like save your grizzles for afterwards and take your turn and lead next time, like, I'm just, yeah, as you can tell, I just don't have that much patience for it. And this is why I'm saying you need the experience at the small scale. Like, you try and organize a group of 50 people and tell me how it goes. And it's like the groans are coming from people that have these idealistic visions about how the parents should behave, but have never had the responsibility of childcare before.
So some of what you say, I deeply trust that all of the things that we're talking about here, or that you're describing, are that we carry them in us. That all of them are a deep expression of our humanness, encoded through evolution, encoded through the necessities of life. And we got sidetracked for a couple of 100 years and fucked up the planet in the process. And now we have to somehow bend back into a more healthy journey. So this, the way you describe, I wasn't there in the morning at the second day, so I didn't experience that, but the way you describe that, even with those, in theory, highly conscious people with a lot of agency, their lack of agency and sheepishness in that moment, what is your experience? What are the conditions to trigger people out of that into agency in a constructive way?
Well, I guess this is where we get to like, okay, Rich, how would you do it differently? And I do want to own as well. You know, that was a very oversimplified and disrespectful way of making a point. And I'm sure people were frustrated for very good reasons. And you know, good luck to you. Oh. But the way that we do Inspiral events, I think, is a formula that is worth repeating in different contexts and adapting to local context. And so that's like, for starters, the host does have authority. Like, you're hosting this event on behalf of the community, but when you put your flag in the ground and say, I'm going to host an event, people say, thank you, you know, like, thank you for taking on that role. It's hard. We're really grateful that you're doing all the organizing. We'll go along with it. And then there's some kind of opening process, which is all about downloading context. Why are we here? How do things operate? What's expected of you? And then basically, if we were together for 3 days, all of the daytime is open space for anyone to bring whatever kind of activity they want to bring. And, you know, we facilitate that so that there's like lots of different workshops happening in parallel. We have what we call home group or pod. It's like you'll be in a group of 5 people and you're going to go and meet them every day at the same time in the day. So it's like you'll be going on all these divergent journeys, but then you return to your pod and the host will provide some questions which are going to like bring you back into coherence and at least have a space where you can process everything that's been going on and make sure that you're being seen and heard. And then in the evenings, we have different kind of, I don't know what you call them, almost like ceremonies of different kinds. So one could be, here are 10 5-minute talks from people in the community that have been doing interesting stuff. Or we're going to have a party. We're going to have just an awesome dance party. Or we're going to have a really like ritualistic, reverent space where people are going to share really meaningful stories from their heart and people are going to have a cry and feel good about it. You know, like there's different things. In some communities, it's been more like, we're going to do some like trippy magical stuff together. We're going to cast a spell. Great. Whatever you want. But there's these kind of like anchor things that happen in the evening, total freedom in the days, and then coming back into the pod, opening circle, closing circle. That formula is really, really strong. And you can push it to we've pushed it to about 80 or 90 people. And I'm not really sure what to do beyond that. I just always keep cracking the group and making it smaller.
When you look at all of this, do you also look at the neurological and evolutionary biology aspects of this? So the way you describe this formula sounds very much like, okay, it's a formula, and it might just have emerged through experience empirically, but it also sounded a bit like there is some science backing this. Do you use that, or is it all based on intuition?
I very much just go by feel and repeat things that worked for me and that I saw from other people. But I am standing on the shoulders of giants, you know, like Inspiral. This culture of gathering has been the essential DNA of Inspiral. And that was inherited by a whole chain of previous communities with a really long and quite impressive history. So I'm not sure where they were drawing from, like whether it's scientific or spiritual or indigenous, like there's lots of different threads that have gone into that. And I've just basically been inducted into this community, and it's always been more or less that format. We've tried different things and evolved it slightly and tuned it and realized that these are the crucial components. I'm sure that there's other people that are much better at the science of it, and they could tell you why it works. I just know that it works. I just know that it's like a machine that reliably generates insight. It's very similar to psychedelics, and just much safer, no come down, much more accessible, much less chance of like psychotic break, but it kind of does the same thing.
What you're describing is what I would call a directed inquiry pump. So you mentioned curiosity, internal curiosity, and many people lose that in our current mode of civilization. It's being unlearned systematically, and it comes up in times of crisis because you're forced. It's called, I call it forced curiosity, because you somehow need to find a way out of your crisis, right? You have to explore. So then, while curiosity, and that's nice, doesn't necessarily have to have a direction. In times of crisis, it has to have a direction. And if you then follow that, and you say you're moving, you're pumping yourself from comfort to discomfort to comfort to discomfort, etc., and you're taking on agency, you're doing that actively. You have direction. You're constantly in an inquiry mode, and you're the constant means you're pumping. So you can do that on an individual level, but I start also using that on a collective level to see whether something actually might have the capacity to work over time, to have true agency as a collective over time, because it has the capacity to evolve. And you only have the capacity to evolve if you are a directed inquiry pump. And so you just said a while ago, this and that thing is outdated in Spiral, because you're moving out of it after 10 years or so. Now you're moving into something else. So this is a clear sign for me that this is the case. But this is very, very hard to design.
Yeah, yeah. And what comes to me is there is a really peculiar role for hierarchy here, and I don't know really how to talk about it well. I might get it wrong, but there's hierarchy in the sense of, like, for example, I said we've got a very clear host, and you know that they're calling the shots. Like, they're going to seek advice and they want to do a good job and they're going to be attentive to people's needs, but they call the shots. And your option is, like, you go with their invitation or you don't. That's the amount of freedom you have in a sense. But then it's like, okay, here's the board for all the open space. You can activate your own agency, but still there's someone facilitating that, and they do have a power role. And also the way that, like, the curiosity gets activated for newcomers is they just witness, like, oh, there's this person. I mean, I might be oversensitive to this, but I really believe that people almost instantaneously on arriving into a room, they form a map of status. There's a kind of like terrain of status. And it's like within 30 seconds of being in a room, you make your first map. And then every encounter you have, you just keep updating that map and making it more accurate. And there's a part of it, there's like a deep mammal part of you that's saying, what are the high status people doing? I want to do that so that I belong here. And who are the low status people? I want to avoid those behaviors because I'm going to be disowned and I'm going to die outside the tribe. Yeah, there's this kind of thing, this low level system going.
Do you know David Schnarch?
No.
Yeah, I think I'll look the book up for you and I'll put it in here.
Nice.
And
nice.
You'll love it, I'm sure.
So then you see, okay, we're proposing all these different open space workshops and events and conversations, and you're tracking what are the high status people offering, you know, and what are the low status people offering. And you notice, like, oh, okay, the cool kids here, they're into crypto technology, or they're into internal family systems or game B or whatever the thing is. And that really strongly signals, like, what kind of curiosity is welcome here. And that's very useful. It's really useful to have role models who are demonstrating, like, this is what it looks like to be highly activated. This is what it looks like to be very generous, to be very compassionate, whatever. You need to have these, like, role models that are signaling something into group, like, this is what we value here. But the problem with so many of these community experiences in the past is that they really calcify around a couple of specific figures. And we know that power corrupts. It's just like such an obvious lesson of history, that the more status that you have, the more your view of reality distorts until you justify doing all kinds of creepy behavior and being self-serving and coercive and abusive. So you need to counterbalance that kind of hierarchy with non-hierarchy. And one of the most amazing things about the Inspiral community is that I think the founding momentum and energy had that understanding from the start. And so very early on, Joshua Weil, who's the founder, like, dethroned himself and made space for that process of transition, for it to be more co-owned. And at the last, we just had a gathering in France for a new initiation of Inspiral people in Europe, like a new constellation that hadn't come together before. I was one of the hosts. We had 15 people together for a week. And at the end of it, 2 of the participants put their hands up to host the next one. So I don't have to do it. And that is the really distinctive ingredient, that people have this expectation that we take turns, that leadership is shared, that it's not like, yeah, Rich is good at this and he contributes this thing and we value it and we respect him. But he's also got all these other shortcomings and weak points, and I'd like to do it my way, please. And, you know, and next time I get to show up just as a participant. So that kind of, like, counterbalance between, there's a kind of leadership, but then we fall back to this non-hierarchical distribution. That's very unique as well, and really potent.
I like looking to pirates for stuff like this. Sam Conniff. Does it ring a bell? No. Yeah, totally amazing, super fun book and talks about that. And one thing I learned from him was that there are two roles on a pirate ship that are special: the quartermaster and the captain, sort of for internal and external affairs, so to say. And but they could be voted out of their job at any time. And I think this constant accountability that you never take your position in the hierarchy for granted, that you always have to prove it, is super exhausting. But it's also the best way to guarantee that people will actually live up to the job.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what I understand from, I grew up in New Zealand. So I grew up like alongside an indigenous culture, not inside of it, but I could look over the fence sometimes and see what's going on there. And from what I understand from that outsider perspective, I think that's how leadership works as well in Māori communities, where like you're empowered by the trust of the community, and they can withdraw it instantaneously. If you lose their trust, then it's going to go somewhere else. And that's like a well understood thing, that your job as a leader is to maintain that trust and to try and live up to the privilege of them investing their followership in you.
And is that something that could scale? So is that something that is saying, we as a collective don't trust you anymore today, so we give trusts to that person over there? Where does that break down? Because that requires some how do you call them, prosthetics of creating an understanding inside of the group, which now we do this very, very bad instantiation of prosthetics in our democracies through voting every couple of years.
Yeah.
So is there a mechanism that you see that might also apply to bigger groups?
This is where I want to switch on my like angry Zen master personality and say, none of your business. Meaning, like, I want to have that conversation with people who know how to govern 1,500 people, 5,000 people, and bring a council of those people together, and then say, what are we going to do about 1 million? The reason that I say none of your business is because there's something about that conversation that is so tempting. It's so distracting. It's so juicy. Like, oh, we could design this and we can design that. And you can spend so many hours going in that direction, and you still find yourself living in a dysfunctional capitalist democracy at the end of it and not have made any headway. And I've been in those conversations for the last 10 years. And I've seen some glimpses of large scale experiments which look promising, most notably in Taiwan. I can share you some stuff about what's happened there. I think it's like since 2014 has been the most advanced democracy in the world, and hardly anyone's paying attention. I think that's the good stuff, but yeah, it's just kind of like the wrong conversation to be having at the moment from my perspective.
Do you know the radical exchange people, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because Matt Pruitt, he's a friend of mine. He's one of the founders of Radical Exchange. He also is super connected. So I was wondering whether you through Audrey Tang might be connected. But if you want to speak with him, just let me know. That I'll connect you.
Nice.
The question that I totally see that point of the angry Zen master. But the question that comes up here is, is there some moment in the past that we know of where something worked? That's what I'm trying to look into. There's some hints that was something going on in the Indus Valley, but it's almost not documented. We know almost nothing about this very, very peaceful people that were living there for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, and living a steady state life that it was probably so good and so uneventful that there was nothing to document about it, and so we've lost it, right?
Yeah.
But do you know of accounts where this might have worked?
Rian Eisler's work, like her early book Chalice and the Blade, I think it's a really good documentation of some semi-utopian societies of the past. And then the more recent one, which is called Nurturing Our Humanity, kind of connects it more to modern neuroscience and stuff. I find that quite inspiring. It from a sort of intuitive perspective, it seems like there's something in indigenous ways of organizing that we've got something to learn from. So like before the European settlers came to Aotearoa, New Zealand, there was like a highly advanced system of distributed governance where all the tribes were basically separate nations, and they were using whatever processes they used to like facilitate trade. They had merchant ships in, I think, 14 different countries around the world before colonization. Like it's a really highly advanced civilization with a highly advanced system of governance that was just completely illegible to the Europeans when they showed up. And so they assumed they were like ignorant savages or something. So I think there's probably some important lessons to be learned there. But it's so hard to take from the past and then update for the future, where the technological landscape has changed so much that all of the affordances are all over the show. I mean, not just the technology, but also the economics. So like the thing that's been so striking to me, having moved from New Zealand to Italy, is that here in Europe, people are just so mobile. It's just like people go to different cities in Europe the way that I used to go to different suburbs, you know? And how do you create any sense of community or local identity when everyone you know is just like smushed across a continent and you never know when they're going to be where? Like that's a new context that we live in, and we're going to be in that context for a long time to come, I think. So we kind of have to, the process of updating these models, I think it might leave them almost unrecognizable from what was happening in the past.
Yeah. We're just exploring in Ethiopia. There's a governance model called GADA, where you used to go through stages of 8 years. Every 8 years, you get initiated in a new stage, and every stage has responsibilities and its own little hierarchy inside. And then there are 5 parties that each one party governs for 40 years. So you know that after 40 years, you're after 5 iterations, so to say, of then you will have to pass governance to this other party that is in the next bioregion or in somewhere adjacent to you, right? And that thing got rooted out by the modern economy and government. It's still known by the old people. So people 70 years of age or something, they still have this idea. Everybody below that, for them, is folklore. And we're looking at how to whether it is possible to use that still like glowing idea somewhere to reignite that in the forms of cooperatives, of farmers that become self-sufficient and independent from economic forces in the nation and globally. And there, the most interesting thing, not only there, but also across other countries in Africa where we're busy doing similar things, we find that trust, just like you put it, has broken down. They don't trust each other. They don't trust the other farmers. They don't trust the cooperatives. They don't trust anybody, which is, to me, a function of the economic system, which is based on exploitation. And this leads right back to the beginning, where you said people, you only work with people who are somewhat independent. And so could this also be true for larger groups? Do larger groups have to be truly independent to have true self-governance? Is that potentially one of the contributing factors for Inspiral to be as successful as a community as it is?
Yes, I mean, I think it's really important to be honest. Sometimes we talk about Inspiral citizenship, for example, but that's a very poor metaphor. Like, we need to be honest about the difference between the experimentation that we're doing and what are the actual responsibilities of a state. So, like, sure, you can get your cool friends together and prototype a different way of doing schooling, but can you provide schooling for all of the citizens in the country? That's a really different project. And providing that 100% inclusivity and accessibility, it's like you're in a different ballpark. So like I said, it's fun to imagine different systems of governance, but you also have to make it as accessible as the current system. And it's very rare to see someone come up with an alternative governance proposal that's as simple as getting people organized every couple of years to tick a box. Like, it feels dumb, sure. You can imagine something more complex, sure. But can you support 300 million people to go through that process that you've developed? Probably not. Like, it's actually really, really difficult to include everyone. And the design challenge is just way harder than people anticipate. So at Inspiral, we're dealing with a very small subset of comparatively very well-off people. We can prototype some interesting systems based on generosity and mutual support. But if you actually, instead of just taking 200, highly selected people and took 200 random members of the population, it wouldn't work. Like, it just totally wouldn't work. And that's why I don't want to make too many claims about how we know how to structure society differently or something like that, because I mean, probably the best we've seen are places like New Zealand and Scandinavia, and still they're full of like poverty, homelessness, like all kinds of troubles, with the best efforts of trying to create something more positive. And I don't think that's for lack of trying or because people are evil or stupid or something. I think it's just really, really hard.
I agree, and I like the way you're protecting the embodied experience of it all, while I'm trying to stretch it to the big thing. But I still have one more question in that area, even if you pull out the angry.
Before you do, yeah. Let me also with my angry hat off. I watched a lecture which I really appreciated from the Long Now Foundation about the system of governance in Bali, how they manage the water supply for all the farmers, and that's basically this like anarcho-syndicalist / mystical. Like, it's governed through religious ceremonies, and it's very decentralized about the decision making, and it adds up to a really optimal system that lasted for 3,000 years. I think there's probably something to learn from them as well. But yeah, onto your question.
I want to put together two strings from two independent people. One is just had his name still. Jeffrey West, Scale. He has Scale is a super interesting book about what happens when things scale. So biological mammals, let's say mammals, when you increase the size of a mammal, double the size of a mammal, it gets 25% more efficient. So that's why a little mouse has 1,000 heartbeats per minute, and a whale has half a heartbeat per minute, right? And we're right predictably in there somewhere. And then he looks at other systems like cities, and cities have similar properties. They as they double in size, you save on 15% of the infrastructure, and you also have 15% more innovation. The innovation can be good, can be culture, patents, but it can also be criminal activity, right? But there's something going on as you scale in size. So that could be a really good argument for we need big systems, because big systems give us the things we so desperately need, the kinds of innovations we need to be able to live with 10 billion people as maybe even custodians on this planet. So, and the other one is, and the reason why I say this is precisely because you say it is very hard to design a governance system that is so easy as to go and tick a box every couple of years. And David van Reybrouck, Against Elections, another amazing book, in my opinion, arguing for, so against exactly that, ticking the box, and for introducing randomness. And randomness in the process of who has authority for a while is a little bit like the randomness of a city, because there's one very, very interesting distinct difference between a city and a kind of organization, because cities survive, other organizations don't. Right? We could bring in the Catholic Church, maybe very old organization, but maybe it has some properties of a city. Maybe it allows for erratic adaptation, and it integrates chaos, and it integrates all of these things. So maybe randomness, introducing randomness in the governance process, adds some of that on a high enough level that it allows for coherent governance.
Yeah, I'm quite warm on the idea of sortition. Like I've got some friends that are they're prototyping a global assembly based on sortition. So can we have 100 people that actually represent the demographic diversity of the planet? And like, it's not random because you want to actually match the diversity of the planet, but the selection of who qualifies is random. Mm-hmm. And then bring them into a debate and build a shared picture of, well, what are our values? What do we think the world needs to be going in? Like, that makes a lot of sense to me at all scales to experiment with. Mm-hmm. I guess my default line is like, certainly we need a lot of governance innovation. That just seems so obvious to me, that people are crying out for innovation, and that while we're in the kind of desert of governance innovation, you have very naive wishful thinking filling its place. So like, all of the hype in the crypto world about like, oh, we'll just get this algorithm and then suddenly everything's going to go really well. Like, that just comes from, there's not that many people that have actually experimented with different modes of governance, and there's not that much like lived experience to base the conversation on. And so that's where I'm go out and run your experiments, do your liquid democracy thing, and do your sortition thing, and do your sociocracy thing, and get the experience. Do the I think everyone on the planet from the age of about 6 should be in a deliberative group where they have to work with a group of other people and figure things out and come to agreements. Like, it's such an important process of your maturity and intelligence, and introduces you to the trade-offs of being a human around other humans. Mm-hmm. Everyone should have that. And if you don't have that, I don't think you're really qualified to make decisions on behalf of other people. I just think we need a flourishing of different experimentation, and to treat it as, like, in the same way as people are saying, we need to treat climate change like it's a war or something, like we need this scale of mobilization. I think we need something like that for governance as well. It's just so obvious the world over that people don't have any faith in their institutions, and we want to replace it with something that's actually robust rather than just like speculative pipe dreams.
Mm-hmm. And robustness grows. Robustness is not doesn't come from the heavens as a theory, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so but that requires there's a certain sense of urgency, I think, in all of this. So would you trust the natural emergent processes of these experiments to be quick enough for humanity? Or is there something that needs to be done or can be done to make this process a little bit faster and a bit more directed?
I'm very suspicious of any long-term predictions about what's happening to the planet. Like, I think it's pretty obvious that climate is changing, but beyond that, like, the impact that's going to have on society is really hard to speculate on. And so that means, like, I've spent a lot of time meditating on the possibility of social collapse coming in my lifetime, and like how to position myself wisely for that. But I'm really not committed to that story that that's what's going to happen. I don't think it's healthy to be too latched onto that. So that means I'm not evaluating my work on, is this going to go fast enough? Is there, there's some kind of deadline and things, the shit is going to hit the fan one day. I mean, the shit already hit the fan 500 years ago, just depending on where you live. So I really don't necessarily buy into this urgency. It's like, the grass doesn't grow faster by pulling on it. And I've got a very clear sense of what the natural rate of growth is for the work that I'm doing, and my capacity and the capacity of the communities around me. And it doesn't matter what my opinion is about that pace. It's just going at that pace. And someone else might, my approach is as much as possible to open source everything I'm doing. So if there's some smart cookies out there that know to do it with the same integrity but 10 times faster, then awesome, go for it. And I think we do get leverage and efficiency from working in public and joining up the dots and getting to know each other and saying like, oh, right, you're Rich, you're Thomas, okay, that does help. But I just don't really take responsibility for saving the world. I really think it's a delusional narcissism.
I agree, but you just said something important, which is do it out in the open, make it transparent, share it, and just that in itself is an important soul set shift to trust that it is you are going to grow, and whatever you're doing is going to grow by sharing it. There's share it, do your work in public, even put the extra effort in to make this adaptable to other contexts, and play well with others. Like, it's very easy to get attached to your own thing and think it's the best thing ever. That's like part of the creative process. But I think part of the job is to elevate other projects and say like, that's good. How can I support you? And not get too attached to your own thing, which is just, it's very easy to do. So like, how would you describe
putting energy into connecting, I think, is a really important set as well.
How would you describe the state of mind that's necessary to be able to do that? So because this is very, very mature. This is the not angry Zen master then, right? But because you have to be able to let go of all of these ego elements of this is mine and I know best, and how do you how does it work for normal people?
My answer is always the same: small group practice. So in a small group of high trust, where people have a high degree of exposure to each other, it becomes very obvious that each of us has a unique set of competencies. And when everyone knows everyone else's competence, it's very relaxing. You give up on this mythology that it's up to you to save the day. It's like, oh, I'm good in the kitchen, you're good on the dance floor. So then we know, depending on the circumstance, who's going to be leading you. And if you if you're not surrounded by people that are also doing purposeful work that feels like it's making a positive contribution, it's very easy to get intoxicated on your own work and think like, oh, no one else is doing it, I've got to do it, I've got to take responsibility for the whole. And if you're not surrounded by people who have a really high degree of trust and are going to tell you that your shit still stinks, it's really easy to get higher on your own supply. As soon as you get any kind of recognition, man, it's so intoxicating. It's so nice to walk into a room and people recognize something about me and my work. I'm like, oh, I'm the coolest guy here. It's really easy to get out of touch with reality, unless I've got trusted peers that are also slapping me around a little bit from time to time and being like, that's out of line, man. Like, pull your socks up, get straight. Like that if I didn't have that community context, I would be completely insufferable. I'm already quite arrogant at the best of times, but without those people like keeping me down to earth, I would have like floated off to the stratosphere by now.
So what I like from conversations like this is that sometimes there's something very clear and very doable and very tiny and easy coming out. So I just had two very similar conversations, one with Michael Groppe from Netherlands, and another one with Tyson, and both basically said the same thing in slightly different images. Tyson just said, follow the water. And Michel said, be patient, take time. And you say, do it in a small group. So, and all these ring deeply true to me. So it totally resonates. And I something in me just knows this is right. This is so deeply human. And I wonder how we can, what it takes to free as many people as possible to be able to find that out for themselves.
Yeah. Just triangulating between those three conclusions, the phrase that comes to mind for me is waging peace. And that means like, and this has been a real clear intention for me for the last few years since I left New Zealand. New Zealand's the most peaceful place I've been. It's probably one of the most peaceful places in the world. And I thought, I was really anxious about leaving it behind and being disconnected from that source of serenity and sanity, until I realized I can take the peace with me, and I can wage peace everywhere I go. And that means every encounter, like at the supermarket checkout, in the meeting, like brushing my teeth, just to be waging peace, like bringing peace. And when that's the job, I look to my side and the other side, and I see millions of people waging peace alongside me. And it's a job that everyone can enroll in. And when people are at peace, then I think their natural capacities take over. And those natural capacities are curiosity, courage, compassion, all of that stuff comes online. But a lot of people don't have access to all of that stuff because they're just so anxious. There's just so many forces on them, both material and psychological, that are interrupting their peace. And at any moment, there's an opportunity to create just a little bubble of peace for someone, a little hospitality, a little care. And it's nourishing for them, but it's also very nourishing for the person who's hosting,
That's beautiful.
It feels fun to do, I tell you. I've been on the project for the last few years and I'm having the time of my life.
Yeah. Do you have kids, by the way?
No.
Yeah.
Instead of having kids, it's like me and my partner decided we're going to do these kind of projects where it's like not really interested in being woken up at 3 a.m. Do want to have lots of time available for designing ambitious interventions in the world. So yeah, we're spreading our memes instead of our genes.
What I found is so first of all, fair, totally. But what I found is that although the absolute time started being more limited with my son being born, and I guess my wife's just pregnant, so there'll be another human coming up. But with the absolute time limited, I became more efficient. It was totally crazy. Output just skyrocketed through that. It's really crazy. I don't know. I can't even remember how I've done it before. This is a bit like the moment we used to organize parties, and we don't remember how we organized parties before we had cell phones.
Yeah,
and we forgot that in a time span of a year or two.
Yeah,
totally. I remember we sat together end of the 90s, and we said, does anybody remember how we did that without phones? And nobody, no clue.
The funny thing about your family is it's like the scale story. It's like as the size of your household increases, so does the efficiency.
Right, that's true. Yeah, so does the efficiency. That's the Jeffrey West there, right there. Okay. Cool, man. So there's a lot to digest for me now. Thank you. That was really good. Thank you.
I really appreciate having a conversation with a peer, with someone that has a lot of some of the same shared landscape of intellectual reference points, and someone I can jam with. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, to me too. Absolutely. Do you, by the way, I mean, you probably do a lot of this jamming as well. And do you have a good way for yourself to integrate that in the rest of the craziness of your life? So meaning there's so much coming out of that, and you again, Tyson, he calls it Dunbarring. He turned Dunbar into a verb by saying taking care of your social sphere and cutting out people from time to time. And as we connect more and more, we're bringing in more and more people, and it becomes much more chaotic and crazy, at least for me. But at the same time, you don't want to cut out people that you find are extremely valuable to the whole learning process here. Is there a way you deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel such an affinity for Tyson. We haven't met yet, but I feel like he's a cousin. I love his war on nouns. I always like to put verbs in places too. At the last micro solidarity program that we ran, where we had 50 people come through a program for a couple of weeks and have a little taste of what is it like to have belonging and like really meaningful relationships with strangers all of a sudden. At the end of it, I made it really clear, having done a few of these, a lot of you are feeling this really delicious sense of belonging and acceptance, and you probably have this unnamed expectation that you're going to get to keep going with us. Mm-hmm. And I want to gently break that expectation. You can't. Mm-hmm. Like me and Nati, who've hosted this program, do not have capacity to keep hosting you. You're all equipped to go and host your own cruise. You can host a small group. You can start there. Mm-hmm. And a small fraction of you are equipped to be hosting at the Dunbar scale, at the congregation scale. Mm-hmm. And if you're at that scale, I've got all the time in the world for you. Everything that I can do to support you, I'm yours. And so that's a very clear directive to people to say, this is who I've got time for. Plus I have Inspiral as my like home community. That's like the people inside of that boundary are the ones that really, them and my family, a couple of friends who are not covered by those other circles. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, yeah, it is a real challenge. Like I go through real struggles around it. Like, going to Berlin, having this awesome gathering, and then I've got these messages and I haven't got to some of them and I feel guilty about it. I feel like I'm letting them down, and I have this whole shame spiral about it. Yeah. So it takes a lot of design work to try and manage all of those connections and do it with integrity. I mean, I tell people to join me on Twitter because mm-hmm. I can kind of handle a lot of people there. I can respond. It's very, very tiny and it's fun for me. It's mm-hmm. juicy, rather than expecting some more long form relationship. Like, yeah. My hack is my Substack. So that's I put out thoughts and I create an interface, structured interface for people to reconnect and if they're interested. So I can keep people in the loop, and they can just attach themselves whenever they feel it's needed and helpful. And I don't get on anybody's nerves by constantly nagging. We should get together. But can be confident that it can happen if it needs to. Yeah. Yeah. For me, my Twitter is like stream of consciousness. It'd be overwhelming for a lot of people. And then I have a Substack.
Yes, your Twitter looks like stream of consciousness. Yes.
And the Substack is like every couple of months, I'll do something very thoughtful, summarize everything that I've been learning. Like here's some articles I've read, stuff I've read in, do some curation. So that's like a slower paced way to keep up to date with what I'm doing. That's also scalable, you know, that I can send it to a few thousand people and it doesn't, well, people still reply and then I have to deal with the comments, but it's more manageable.
Final question, and then I'll let you go. If unless you want to say or add something or have questions, and that's for some reason I'm starting to decide. I haven't decided yet, but I think I'm starting to decide that next year will be my year of learning how to be slow. And I feel that there's a lot of energy in being slow, and I've always been more on the fast side with everything, and so it's a great challenge. My wife's really good at being slow, but I'm terrible, and I get the sense that you might be pretty good at being slow in a good way. Is that something you practice deliberately, or how do you stay in the right pace?
By managing my life on my calendar, not on my inbox. Because the calendar is a finite list. And so I easily get overwhelmed and overstimulated and put way too much stuff in there and go, and then I have to wind it back. So like putting in no meetings Wednesday, creativity and connection Friday, sacred weekend, you know, like we're really blocking that stuff out. And then it's like, okay, what's left over? How much space have I got? I have a spreadsheet where I list out all of my commitments and my desires and responsibilities and all the different communities. And then I assign how much time would it take to do this justice. And I always find it's like 45 days per month, doesn't add. And then every time I do that process, I try and gracefully step out and cut stuff out. But that has helped. I mean, the other thing is just to live in a slow place. It's part of the reason we're in Italy. It's like, it runs at like 1/10 the frequency of Berlin. So it's fun. And that's the other thing you can do with your calendar is like, my high-paced week in Berlin is here. I'm going to go, I'm going to get high and follow that encounter and like do 17 things in one day and have all these stimulating ideas. Then I return to the slow place.
Oh, well, I live on a slow place. We live on a ship, and we have a home in Costa Rica, so that's also a slow pace. And one thing I've been doing for almost 10 years now is that I have a tracker on my phone, and I track when I spend time with my son, when I spend time with my wife, when I am doing work things, when I'm sleeping. Am I sleeping alone, or is my wife next to me, or is my son next to me maybe? And for a while I was really good at balancing all three. So the private life, work, and sleep, roughly 30%, or roughly thirds. Currently is shifting slightly out of balance, but it's a really good way to be absolutely clear on what are you doing? What are you using this time for? Is it family? Is it work? If it's not in my list, then this list is super short. So not in my list of things, then should I be doing this? I'm not sure.
And if you're trying to stretch, you know, if you're trying to develop a habit, then maybe it makes sense to like shift that fraction and make it like, you know, I'm only going to do 20% of my time on work. If you can afford to do that, you know, if your economics work out, that could be the job for next year. Is like, okay, I'm doing 1 day a week where I'm really focused on work. Can it be done? Can your identity sustain that level of relaxation?
That would be, that's so crazy. I'm so scared of it. But yeah, what's going to happen to my identity, right? Yeah, because that's yeah, that's
I would,
but that's
I would
just,
suggest part of that is surrounding yourself with people who challenge your mythology of urgency. People that give you a longer term perspective and be nursed by that, like, Bayo Kamalafe is always saying times are urgent, so we need to slow down. Like,
yeah.
have those kind of people feeding you as well will probably help.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll come back for that. Okay. Friend, is there anything you want to add to this conversation, or are you complete?
Yeah, I'm really satisfied. I guess there's the kind of pitch of join my Substack, come to my Twitter. We'll be running micro solidarity programs next year. There's going to be a gathering, all that stuff. And yeah, if someone is watching and interested, connect with me on Twitter and we go from there. It's the easy way.
They will. Cool, man.
Great
Thank you.
pleasure.
See you soon.
Ciao.
Ciao.